In this video, we'll be looking at migrations. So let's go and see the application that we've been working on. So this is the class model, that flight model that we've created that has three variables: the origin, destination, and duration. And the origin and destination are character fields with a maximum length of 72, and the duration is an integer field, as you can only enter integers. But of course, nothing here is actually modifying my database that Django is using in order to store information about my application. So what I'd like to do is somehow tell Django that you should update the database to include information about the models that I have just created. This is a process that we refer to in Django and more generally as migrations. I create a migration to say, here are some changes that I would like to add to my database. Then migrate them in order to take those changes and actually implement them to the database. So it's a two-step process. One is to create the migration, the instructions for how to actually go about manipulating the database, and then we need to take that migration step of taking those instructions and actually applying them to the underlying database. We can make the migrations via command. So in my command prompt, we'll be writing manage.py and followed by, so manage.py has a number of different commands that we can use, which will control various parts of the application. And now we'll be using manage.py to make migrations. So make migrations. And so if I click on enter, so now what I see is that no changes detected, and that's because I did not save my file. So now let's go ahead and re-enter it. So at first it did not detect anything because I didn't actually add a new model before saving it. But now after saving it, if I go ahead and type in manage.py, make migrations, and click on enter, we can see that we are given a migration for flights in 0001 initial.py, where in this migration we've created a model called flight. So this is the migrations folder that has been created for me. I didn't have to create it myself, and that's the file that is created. And this file has instructions to Django for how to manipulate the database to reflect the changes I have made to model. Here is an instruction to Django to create a new model called flight, and that has particular fields inside of it. So we have the origin, the destination, and the duration that we've created. And additionally, we have the ID. And so the ID is created by default for any model, and that ID is specific to each flight, let's say, object. So let's say I have 3 flights. The first flight is going to have ID of 1. The second flight is going to have an ID of 2, and the third is going to have an ID of 3. And so IDs are useful for us to when we start calling objects. So let's say I want a specific flight, and so I can get that specific flight from its ID. And we'll be seeing more about that in the upcoming videos. But for now, just know that every model is associated with an ID, which might be a field if you want to say, so which is created by default. So it's basing off of the changes that I've made to models.py. the model that I've added is now reflected in this migration. Now if I want to apply this migration, actually apply it to Django's database, I can run inside of my command line python manage.py migrate. Click on enter, and so now that I've written this command, there are a bunch of default migrations that are applied as well, but notice that one of the migrations that gets applied is the one right here. So flights.001 initial, to say that let's go ahead and apply that migration, create that table that's going to represent flights. So now you can notice that if I go to my file, I have in addition to airline and flights and manage.py, I have db.sqlite3, which is the database of my application of let's say the table, which is going to store the flights. So it has all the data about my flights, and so now I can actually begin to manipulate data and interact with sort of models, and we're going to be seeing that in the next video.